Who invented honey? What if I told you that one of the oldest foods on Earth was never actually invented? No one created it. No one discovered its recipe. And yet, it helped shape human history long before the first cities, the first farms, or even the first civilizations existed. I'm talking about honey. Today, we stir it into tea, spread it on toast, drizzle it over pancakes, and buy it from supermarket shelves without giving it a second thought. But here's something extraordinary. Honey is the only food humans eat that is made entirely by another species. Even more astonishing, archaeologists have discovered jars of honey buried inside ancient Egyptian tombs that are more than 3,000 years old, and they're still edible. How can a food survive for thousands of years without spoiling? And if humans never invented honey, how did it become one of the most valuable foods in history? To answer that question, we have to travel back millions of years. Long before the first human ever walked the earth. More than 100 million years ago, flowering plants evolved one of nature's most brilliant survival strategies. Instead of relying only on the wind to spread their pollen, they began producing sweet nectar to attract insects. Bees gladly accepted the invitation. They collected nectar as food while unknowingly carrying pollen from flower to flower. It became one of the most successful partnerships in the natural world. But then something remarkable happened. Bees realized nectar spoiled quickly, so nature pushed them toward an extraordinary solution. They repeatedly swallowed and regurgitated the nectar, mixing it with special enzymes before storing it inside wax honeycombs. Thousands of worker bees then fanned their wings for hours, slowly removing moisture until the nectar transformed into a thick golden liquid where bacteria could barely survive. Without ever planning it, bees had created one of the most effective natural preservation systems on Earth. Millions of years later, humans wouldn't invent it, they would simply discover it. The earliest humans had no idea how honey was made. They only knew one thing: it was worth almost any risk. Imagine walking through a forest nearly 10,000 years ago, and spotting a hollow tree buzzing with thousands of angry bees. One careless move could unleash an entire swarm. A single mistake might leave you covered in painful stings, or worse. Yet people climbed anyway. They risked injury, suffering, and even death for just a few handfuls of honey. Why? Because to ancient humans, honey wasn't simply delicious. It was something almost magical. Today, sweetness is everywhere. We drink it in soft drinks, eat it in candy, chocolate, cakes, and cookies. But for most of human history, concentrated sweetness barely existed. Fruit was seasonal. Many wild berries were sour. Refined sugar hadn't been invented. Honey was different. It was intensely sweet, packed with energy, and incredibly rare. For many people, the very first taste of honey may have been the sweetest thing they had ever experienced in their entire lives. One of the oldest pieces of evidence comes from a cave in Spain. Painted on its walls nearly 8,000 years ago is a remarkable scene showing a person climbing ropes toward a wild beehive while bees swarm all around. It is one of the oldest surviving artworks ever created by humans. And what does it depict? Not a king. Not a battle. Not a great hunt. It shows someone collecting honey. Think about that for a moment. Out of everything our ancestors could have painted, they chose to preserve the story of honey. That tells us just how precious it must have been. Honey wasn't simply another source of food. It was a treasure worth risking your life for, a reward nature hid behind thousands of tiny guardians. And before long, humanity would discover that honey could do far more than satisfy a craving for something sweet. It would become medicine, wealth, and one of the most extraordinary natural gifts our species has ever known. As humans settled into villages and the first civilizations began to rise, honey became far more than just something sweet to eat. It became medicine, currency, a sacred offering, and one of the most valuable natural resources in the ancient world. Long before pharmacies or modern hospitals existed, people noticed something extraordinary. Wounds treated with honey often heal better than wounds left untreated. They had no idea what bacteria were, and they certainly didn't know anything about antibiotics, but through simple observation they discovered that honey somehow helped prevent infection. Thousands of years later, modern science finally explained why. Honey contains very little water, has a naturally acidic environment, and produces antibacterial compounds that make it incredibly difficult for harmful microbes to survive. What ancient people believed was magic turned out to be one of nature's most remarkable scientific creations. The ancient Egyptians treasured honey so much that they offered it to their gods and buried jars of it inside the tombs of pharaohs. Archaeologists have uncovered sealed jars of honey that are more than 3,000 years old, and astonishingly, the honey inside was still edible. Imagine opening a jar that had remained sealed since the age of the pyramids, and discovering that its contents were still safe to eat. Very few foods on Earth could survive for thousands of years. Honey can. That alone made it seem almost supernatural. Because honey was so difficult to obtain, it quickly became a symbol of wealth. Unlike grain, fruit, or vegetables, honey couldn't simply be planted and harvested whenever people wanted. It depended entirely on bees. Collecting it from wild hives was dangerous, and even early beekeeping required enormous patience and skill. As a result, honey became a luxury reserved for kings, temples, and the wealthy. In many ancient societies it was collected as tribute, presented as royal gifts, and used in important religious ceremonies. To own honey wasn't just to own food. It was to own something rare enough to represent status and power. Then humanity made another astonishing discovery. If honey was mixed with water and left alone, something mysterious happened. Tiny invisible organisms began transforming the sweet liquid into alcohol. The result was mead, widely considered the oldest alcoholic drink in human history. Long before beer became common, long before vineyards covered the hillsides of Europe, people across Africa, Asia, and Europe were already celebrating weddings, festivals, and religious ceremonies by drinking fermented honey. To them, mead wasn't merely an alcoholic beverage. It was a sacred drink, one worthy of celebrations, rituals, and even the gods themselves. Honey soon found its way into mythology as well. The ancient Greeks believed the infant Zeus, the future king of the gods, was hidden from his father and fed with honey during his childhood. In Norse mythology, the legendary mead of poetry granted wisdom and extraordinary inspiration to anyone who drank it. Across civilizations separated by thousands of miles and countless generations, honey repeatedly appeared not simply as food, but as a symbol of life, wisdom, immortality, and divine power. Few foods in history have earned such universal admiration. But perhaps the most incredible part of honey's story isn't its sweetness, or its place in mythology. It's the tiny creatures responsible for making it. A single teaspoon of honey represents the lifetime work of dozens of bees. To produce just 1 pound of honey, an entire colony must visit roughly 2 million flowers, flying a combined distance of more than 55,000 miles, more than twice the circumference of the Earth. Every spoonful of honey you eat is the result of millions of tiny flights, millions of flowers, and countless hours of teamwork carried out by insects weighing less than a paperclip. For thousands of years, humans believed bees somehow created honey by magic. Only in the last few centuries did scientists finally understand the astonishing complexity of a beehive. Every worker bee has a specific responsibility. Some collect nectar. Others process it with enzymes. Others fan their wings continuously to remove moisture. Others guard the entrance against intruders. Individually, each bee seems insignificant. Together, they operate one of the most sophisticated manufacturing systems ever created by nature. Even today, despite all of humanity's scientific knowledge and technological achievements, we still cannot truly recreate what bees have perfected over millions of years. Today, honey is enjoyed on every inhabited continent. We stir it into tea, drizzle it over yogurt, spread it on warm bread, and use it in everything from traditional medicine to modern skincare. Yet despite our factories, laboratories, and advanced technology, there is one thing we still cannot do. We cannot invent real honey. We can imitate its flavor, manufacture artificial sweeteners, and engineer countless substitutes, but genuine honey still depends entirely on millions of bees doing exactly what they have done for more than 100 million years. So, who invented honey? The honest answer is no one. Humans didn't invent it. Ancient civilizations didn't invent it. Even bees didn't consciously invent it. Honey is the result of millions of years of evolution, a masterpiece patiently crafted by nature itself. Humans simply became the first species curious enough to taste it, and wise enough to recognize its value. So the next time you pour honey into your tea, spread it across a slice of warm toast, or drizzle it over your breakfast, remember this. You're not just tasting something sweet. You're tasting a masterpiece that existed long before humanity. Long before civilization. Perhaps even before the idea of invention itself. And maybe that's what makes honey so extraordinary. Because sometimes, the greatest inventions were never invented at all.